was pretty rough times in our country at that time. We were just finishing up the Carter presidency. Built my personality not only around law enforcement, but around the problems that exist in every society. In many cases, that would be determined to be fraud.
Right.
But what we were having, especially in Fulton County, is a lot of these people were getting out without having to post any money and going right back out and committing the same crimes they were committing before. And so we had to come up with a way to stop that.
Welcome to the Ben Garcia Show, powered by Wasega. Today we are joined by Senator Randy Robertson. Senator Robertson is a 30-year law enforcement veteran. He is a 2010 FBI National Academy graduate, and he has served in the Georgia Senate since 2018. Today, Senator Robertson is the Majority Caucus Whip and my brother-in-law. Randy, it is great to have you with us today. I want to take this interview and really give my viewers a holistic idea about the story of Randy Robertson and what drives your service in the Georgia Senate. So where did the story of Randy Robertson start?
Well, oddly enough, I mean, I could go back and tell the story of, being born in Hamilton, Georgia, there in Harris County, right in the heart of District 29. And, how I was raised by, a great mother. My father was an incredible friend of mine, and just the impact that they both had on my life, which I guess led me to where it is. But I think the crux of where everything comes from as far as service started when I was 22 years old and went to work for the Muskogee County Sheriff's Office and started learning exactly what serving and protecting was all about.
Absolutely. So in your law enforcement career, where did you start out on the totem pole?
I started out where everybody started out back then. I started out working in the Muskogee County Jail on what we called morning watch, which the normal human being would call third shift. So you got to see all of the chaos that came in through the back door of the county jails back then, and really built my personality not only around law enforcement, but around the problems that exist in every society, whether it be poverty, addiction, or whatever.
Okay, so you're 22 years old, you said, when you came into to law enforcement and started working in the Muskogee County Jail. Let's rewind 4 years. You're 18 years old. You're graduating high school. What year was that?
That was 1980, and I was 17.
And you were 17. Okay, so in 1980, what was your outlook on the world? Were you optimistic heading out of high school? Where were things at that point?
Well, it was a very different world back then. I was fairly optimistic. We were finishing up. It was pretty rough times in our country at that time. We were just finishing up the Carter presidency, so prices were a little high. I was, of course,
Everybody was wearing a sweater.
Everybody was wearing a sweater. I was driving driving a car and having to buy gas. My single mother was raising myself and my two sisters, and she was working two jobs. And my older sister and I were both working jobs. So, I had an understanding of, that times were as good as they could be. I come from a very loving family, but I did feel some of the external pressure that when I graduated from high school, I had to make some tough decisions. And start performing as back then as a man was required to perform.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now let's take that mindset that you had when you graduated high school, compare that to kids that are graduating today and where the world is today. Do you feel like kids are coming out as optimistic leaving high school as they were when you were graduating, or do you think that there's sort of been a regression in that sense?
Well, I don't know how optimistic they are, but I will tell you that I think there's a lot less motivation and energy coming out, and it's not to the fault of the graduate. It's to what the graduate's been exposed to throughout their childhood. There's a dependence on screens. There's a dependence on, iPhones and iPads and other things that not only do we seek education through, but we seek entertainment through. And there's a reduction in civic engagement. There's a great book out called Bowling Alone that talks about how, at one time in our society, we all got out and we mingled with each other, whether it was through a bowling league, whether it was through some fraternal organization. Now everybody considers friends people that they don't even know, but who selects them to be their friend on a social media site.
It's super weird how we took, the dopamine rush from, civic engagement and clubs and things like that. And they gave it to us on our phones. And so that's now the substitute. You get the same dopamine rush from scrolling through Instagram for an hour as you would, volunteering at the local food pantry or participating in a civic club. And I think that's sort of kind of been their goal a little bit, in my opinion.
Well, and I think they've accomplished that goal. And I think that the people out there that really dislike our country, dislike America, I think they appreciate the fact that we have an addiction right now that I would say over 90% of our country experiences, because it's going to make their job a whole lot easier to succeed.
A whole lot easier.
When our face is looking into a screen and not out there doing what we need to do to help our country grow and become stronger.
No, absolutely. 100%. I definitely agree with that. Did you feel when you graduated that there was an extreme pressure for you to pursue a 4-year college degree? And do you think that, the pressure that we're putting on kids today to pursue 4-year college degrees is really, the best path for them or in their best interests?
When I graduated, there was not the pressure
Okay.
to get a 4-year college degree. There was pressure to get a job. And if you could get a job and get a college degree, then that was great. Okay. And so right after graduating from high school, I already had a job. So I continued working at my job, and I went and tested the waters of the technical education school, went to Columbus Tech, and eventually right before starting with the Muskogee County Sheriff's Office, migrated over to what was then Columbus College and what today is Columbus State University, but with the idea of getting a job, which is why I chose something like criminal justice, where I felt was more of a job that I was focused on as opposed to a business degree or something else.
Something open-ended.
That just opened up potential to go out and find something, but not knowing exactly what.
Exactly. That's a really interesting perspective, because I think that we've lost that in America right now, where I see a lot of kids, coming into the fraternity that I was in college. Their parents didn't want them to get a job. Their parents didn't want them to work. They wanted them to solely focus on pursuing that 4-year degree. And I've seen it, especially in Columbus, at Columbus State, more often than not, the kids that came in with that mentality and their parents came in telling them not to get a job, a lot of times those kids burn out on school and they don't make it to the finish line of even graduating. And then they're sitting there with no degree and no job.
Well, and then you have, I heard Nikki Haley's son say something a few weeks ago where everybody that graduated from college with him, they're looking for jobs.
Yep,
and if you start looking at their degrees and everything, they're going to continue looking for jobs.
Absolutely.
And oddly enough, in the world we live in, a lot of the jobs that they went into school thinking the 4-year degree would help them get, those are going to be the jobs that AI and other types of technology are going to swallow up.
100%.
Where we're going to be walking around looking for electricians, plumbers, auto technicians, law enforcement officers, firefighters, and other things that really AI cannot come in and take over.
And that's why I enjoy state politics a lot more than I enjoy federal politics, because at the federal level, you're still seeing from the Department of Education down, you're still seeing this push for kids to go and get 4-year degrees. But you look at a state like Georgia, the state's investing in workforce development, and they're investing in opportunities where kids don't have to go get the 4-year degree to make $80,000, $100,000 a year in the 4 years following leaving high school. So let's talk about workforce development. Where do you see Georgia going, from tech schools to 4-year universities? Where do you see state education around technical education going over the next 5 years?
Well, what I've noticed is a transition where a lot of the technical programs that used to be housed at our technical colleges are now getting into our 4-year university programs. Where you look at Columbus State University now, they have an incredible cybersecurity program that is actually being taught by somebody who lived it in the real world. Not on the university or not somebody who's just been educated in it, but somebody who actually went out there and did the job for a Fortune 250 company. And so you've got them coming in, given those skill sets that within a year or 2 years into the program, that student qualifies for a real job out in the real world.
Absolutely.
To deal with real issues.
Absolutely. And that's huge. I like the advancement of the college and career academies that was started with Casey Cagle. I like that they've continued that under the Burt Jones lieutenant governorship, and they've expanded that, severely across the state. It's been awesome to watch. Moving on, more into your law enforcement background, FBI National Academy. What was that like? I mean, where did you go to participate in that
Well, first of all, I was nominated by former Mayor Jim Weatherington, sponsored by a great FBI agent that operated here in our area for a long time. And to get into the academy on an annual basis, they select a little less than 5% of law enforcement officers throughout the world. Oh, wow. My roommate, when we were up there in Quantico, Virginia, there at the FBI National Academy, which is on the Marine base guarded by the United States Navy, my roommate was from Sri Lanka. He was the terrorism expert in Sri Lanka.
Oh, wow!
Which is one of the things that were really good about it, because once I came out, Mayor Weatherington had become mayor of Columbus, and he designated me as the director of Homeland Security for his first 4 years in office.
Wow! So,
it was an incredible place. I was able to network with some of the greatest law enforcement minds in the world and develop new ideas. But one thing I found out really quick when I was there with people from all over the place is that the problems we have here in Georgia, right, the problems we have here in the United States are the same problems everybody has throughout the world.
Yeah, 100%. There's limited resources, and there's pretty much unlimited, want for those resources.
Well, and because of the fact you and I talked about earlier, some of the social disengagement, there's a lot of people who spend a whole lot of time thinking about new ways to enrich themselves by breaking the law and taking advantage of other human beings.
Absolutely.
And so seeing that on the level was impressive, but also understanding that domestic terrorism is just not a problem here in the United States of America, and international terrorism exists everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So you were a 30-year law enforcement veteran, FBI National Academy. You decided to run for state senate in 2017. How did your law enforcement background, how has that shaped your legislative agenda as a state senator since you got in 2018?
Well, it's really easy to do that. Serving and protecting, I think, should be the mantra for any elected official as much as it is for a law enforcement officer out patrolling the streets. But I told somebody this several years ago because they were talking about what lane public safety operated in. And I told them that I felt economic development was a lane. Mm-hmm. I felt that education was a lane. Yeah. I felt that any aspect, whether it was whether it was the civil community, no matter the discussion we were having in the Capitol, healthcare, whatever, that all of these were individual lanes, but that public safety is a roundabout.
Right.
It touches every single one of those lanes. If you do not have good, safe communities, you're going to have terrible health care. 100%. If you do not have good, safe communities, you're not going to have economic growth. If you don't have good, safe communities, you're not going to have strong educational programs and institutions. So I've been able to go up there and I think inject the public safety mindset not only into those law enforcement actions that the state carries out, but also in the day-to-day operations of the state.
Let's talk about cashless bail. You were in a lot of headlines in the AJC about cashless bail. What was the intent behind the bill that you put forward?
Well, the intent behind the bill was to make our community safer. Okay. And what we had found out is that a lot of courts and a lot of communities had gotten real lazy when it come to holding those who were accused of committing crimes, holding them accountable to be a part of the criminal justice system. A lot of people were getting out of jail either by signing a note or by somebody else coming in and signing it and vouching for them, no matter if the bond was $50,000 or $5,000. And which, if you did that in any other aspect of life where you came in and you signed something declaring that your signature was worth $50,000 for you to follow along, in many cases that would be determined to be fraud.
Right.
But what we were having, especially in Fulton County, is a lot of these people were getting out without having to post any money and going right back out and committing the same crimes they were committing before. And so we had to come up with a way to stop that. So what we did is we eliminated as much as possible cashless bail in Georgia for many, many crimes, mostly violent crimes and sex crimes. So what happens is somebody comes in charged with whatever, the judge now has to assess a bond and they have to post a bond. That bond can be as much as the judge wants it to be or as little as the judge wants it to be.
But the judge is now held accountable for what the bond is set to now.
Exactly. We had a case after the law was passed several years ago, well, I'll say about maybe 2 years ago, around Coweta County, where a gentleman was arrested for possession of drugs, a felony amount. The judge in that case gave him a recognizance bond or a signature bond. The law enforcement community said, yeah, you can't do that. There's this state law.
Right.
This judge said, no, I don't like that state law. So he let this guy sign a bond and get out. And within a day of getting out, this guy went out and murdered a homeless person in that county.
Oh my
and
goodness.
This was the exact reason that was put into place. This person short-circuited the criminal justice system, went out and committed an even more heinous crime than the one he had been arrested for.
Wow. Okay. So moving outside of your law enforcement background, you're the majority whip of the state Senate. So you are involved with all of the major legislation that comes through that body. And more recently, one of the big emphases that the majority caucuses have both had is cutting taxes and tax reform, tax rebates. Where do you see tax reform and tax rebates going in the 2026 session?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll tell you what, this year, I can tell you what the Senate's planning on doing. We're planning on continuing to tackle the state income tax, to continue driving that down lower and lower and leaving money in our constituents' pockets. But also, 4 years ago, we attacked property taxes, and we received political pushback from different areas. But we think the environment has shifted enough now that others who may not necessarily have agreed with us 4 years ago are now coming to understand what we're trying to do. So we're also going to tackle, once again, property taxes and getting those lower. It's really hard for me to come to a business owner or a homeowner and say, listen, you bought this house 30 years ago, you paid all your mortgage payments, it's yours, but you still got to pay taxes on it. It's really hard to do that.
It's yours as long as you pay for it every year, or else it's ours.
That's right. and the problem that comes from that, and I don't disagree, is a lot of those taxes are used to pay for other things. Property taxes, what a lot of people don't understand is the vast majority of your property taxes go to education.
Right.
The school district gets it. But what we have to figure out with is our government's going to have to get leaner, and we're going to have to find different ways of raising that money, whether it's through user fees and other things.
I mean, now you're looking at it, the majority of the property taxes are coming from folks that are over the age of 55.
Yeah.
So by that reasoning, the majority of the funding for the schools is coming from folks that are over 55. And unless we're able to find a way to distribute that more around to everybody else, that and in the pot, I don't know that generation is going to be able to carry that for too much longer for us.
Right. And what will happen is, while I'm calling for schools to get leaner on their own, when the day you're talking about comes, they'll have to get leaner by no choice other than that. But what we have to look at also on the education side is, and I think you can look in a lot of the school districts around the state of Georgia, around the country, see that there's been a growth in administration, while shrinkage in the classroom.
Absolutely.
We need to start rethinking education and also, but a lot of people, when they get addicted and dependent on money, especially bureaucrats and elected officials, it's really hard to pry it away from them.
It's really hard to claw back those contracts with your friends. Once you've signed away that we're giving this vendor $10,000 a year for the next 30 years. It's tough to claw that kind of stuff back.
But there's only two ways the citizens can fix that. They either have to change the mindset of the elected official, or they have to start electing other people.
Start electing new folks. And
That's
staying
right.
on that topic, on our youth. All across the world, I think Australia or New Zealand, one of those countries, recently passed a social media ban for kids under 16 years old in their country. Is that something that you could see being Georgia going in that direction, or being something that the state Senate may need to look into, seeing as where social media is headed right now and the violent political nature that we have across our country right now?
Yeah, well, and I think the latter part that you talk about, the violence that comes with it, I don't necessarily think that a lot of that violence is coming out of the 16 and younger demographic right now. But I think we have to realize, why are our children having such a problem with social media? That's because their mothers and fathers are failing, because moms and dads aren't being moms and dads.
Yeah.
That's the reason you see 6, 7, and 8-year-old children walking around with brand new smartphones.
Yeah.
Because mom and dad are abdicating their responsibility of parenting to an electronic device.
100%.
And I think when that happens, then you're going to get what you go in the kitchen, you throw a bunch of ingredients in the pot, you're going to get what you create in that pot, and that's what they're creating. What I think we need to do is, I think the social media companies, and I think those who serve and protect, whether they be legislators or policymakers in the community, need to find comfortable ground, because social media is, the social media companies, they're a business.
Right.
Nobody has to download any app from any place if they choose not to. But if they do, and they are under the age of, let's say they're a minor, then their parents need to be involved in what's going on. And we need to start, like we've done with school shootings and other things, hold the parents more accountable for their child's actions.
Yep.
And I think that'll wake these lazy mothers and fathers up
100%.
to start doing their job.
100%. Yeah. You would think, you had Mark Zuckerberg go on, he got called and questioned in front of the U.S. Senate. Josh Hawley asked him, he said, what about the 50% of girls ages 13 to 17 on your platform for a 2-week period? 50% of the women that age, or the kids that age, were exposed to unwanted nudity on that platform. And he to Mark Zuckerberg's credit, he turned around and apologized to the parents and victims that were behind him. But you would think things like that would wake parents up, but I think that it just keeps slipping further and further in the other direction. And then, to bring us to a question I ask every single guest that comes on here, like, what is your opinion on Nick Fuentes? That to me, this brings the question of Nick Fuentes really to the forefront, because when people with dangerous ideas like that are allowed free speech, which I think that they are 100% allowed to say what they want to say, when children are allowed to see that content, I do think that there is sort of, it calls into question, whether kids should be on those platforms if those ideas and those things are going to be freely accessible on a platform or a town hall,
Yeah, and to Mark Zuckerberg's credit, I believe Mark Zuckerberg is one of the big social media company CEOs that limit their child's social media access.
Yes, and he talks about that a lot.
And so my thing is, if the guy who created the product is keeping the product from his children, what we call that in law enforcement is a clue that every other mother and father need to be doing the same thing.
Bill Gates' kids didn't have computers.
Absolutely, because they understood the danger that lied within their product. It's almost like working for a major cigarette manufacturer, but prohibiting anybody in your family to smoke. Yeah. That's a clue that there's something wrong with it. Now, to Nick Fuentes, the little bit I know about Nick Fuentes and I agree on almost nothing. But when it comes to free speech, what we find is there's a lot of hateful speech out there.
Absolutely.
But as long as we live in this country, and if people don't think free speech is under attack, look at the UK, look at these other places where people are being arrested
all
for
across
tweets
Europe, all across Europe,
and all over the place. But I don't want that to ever be the Georgia I live in. Certainly not America, but definitely not Georgia. So I think everybody has a right to say whatever they want to say. To me, it lets me know who, because you're judged by who you hang around with, you're judged by who you follow on social media and all this, and it would help me make better decisions on watching what people whose reels I may watch or whose content I may read, when these people go out here and they spout these racist ideas, or they spout these violent ideas, or people involved in higher education go out and spout these extremely ignorant ideas.
Right.
I want to know who it is, because I'm going to make decisions about my children and my life.
Exactly.
And based on that information, I'm able to make those decisions. But as far as Nick Fuentes, I think a lot of his stuff, he goes out to get a reaction.
100%.
And I think the people that respond to him are feeding into his addiction. And, in my world, Nick Fuentes doesn't matter. So, I focus on the people that do, and those are people who may not agree with me.
Yep.
They're willing to say whatever they want to me. And at the end of the day, we respect each other, even though we may go separate ways on issues. Yep. They call me in the middle of a hailstorm and need somebody to come out and change their tire. I'm going to be there for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And all across Europe, I think in the UK, 12,000 people were arrested for comments that they posted on social media. You compare that to Russia, which is supposed to be an authoritarian dictatorship. Only 3,000 people were arrested there for the same charge. And the laws are pretty much the same. And actually last week, France came out and arrested 10 people for criticizing the prime minister's wife online.
Well, and one thing, people always like to throw our Constitution around like it's just something, it's old yesterday's news, and it really doesn't matter. But if you look at Canada and you look at a lot of these other places, there is no Constitution.
Right.
Their citizens do not have the rights, which I love. The people that always complain about how terrible America is are usually doing it on American soil.
Absolutely.
Because they can do it in America.
Exactly.
If you go to Europe, if you go to Russia, you go to Canada and other places, if you went there, or even Mexico, and you went there and spoke the way about those countries that people speak about our country, you would be locked up.
You'd be locked up or at the very least taken off of every social media platform in those countries.
Absolutely.
100% agree with you. In the same way, though, that freedom of speech is sort of being, labeled as a right-wing idea now, honestly, what are your thoughts on the labeling of the phrase America First as radically right-wing?
Well, listen, I think, everybody talks about how they just can't stand the acronym MAGA.
Yeah.
Or Make America Great Again. And what I love is to see their face when I explain to them. I'll say, well, who do you think came up with that? And they'll say, Donald Trump. And I go, no, actually, it was Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan back in
Ronald Reagan came up
ago.
with that. And you see everybody go, oh, well, okay. And so in the first vote I ever cast as an 18-year-old voter was for Ronald Reagan to be our president in his first term. And so I absolutely think making America great again should be a priority. It is not hate speech. It does not belong to the right. It does not belong to the left. It belongs to every American citizen. But my focus, I think America's great.
Yeah.
But my focus each and every day when I roll out of bed and when I walk into the state capitol is to keep Georgia first.
Yep.
Because if I keep Georgia first, if my friends down in Florida keep Florida first, friends in Louisiana do their job, Montana, Wyoming, Texas, then America is going to be great.
Yeah.
So I would like for everybody to quit attaching themselves to some rhetoric, living and swimming in an echo chamber every day, and decide what's important to them as an individual and go out each and every day and work toward that mission, 100%. Their mission, and not the mission of everybody else.
100%. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. If you wanted to leave our viewers with one simple message about the 2026 session for the Georgia State Senate, what would your message be?
My message would be pay attention. All of the day-to-day sessions, all the committee meetings, everything is live streamed. That Capitol, which I think probably may be the last government building to ever come in under budget, belongs to 11 million Georgia citizens. That's your building, and the people working inside that building are there to do their job for you, and you pay them. So get engaged, pay attention to what's going on, and if your representative or your senator is not doing the job that you sent them up there to do, remember that when the ballot is printed.
Awesome. Thank you so much. As always, I'm Ben Garcia, and this is the Ben Garcia Show, powered by Wasega.